Chapter 20 of The Pirate's Own Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Logan McCammon. The Pirate's Own Book by Charles Elms. Chapter 20. The Life, Career, and Death of Captain Thomas White. He was born at Plymouth, where his mother kept a public house. She took great care of his education, and when he was grown up, as he had an inclination to the sea, procured him the king's letter. After he had served some years on board a man of war, he went to Barbados, where he married, got into the merchant service, and designed to settle in the island. He had the command of the Marigold brigantine given to him, in which he made 2 successful voyages to Guinea and back to Barbados. In his third, he had the misfortune to be taken by a French pirate, as were several other English ships. The masters and inferior officers of which they detained, being in want of good artists, the brigantine belonging to White they kept for their own use, and sunk the vessel they before sailed in. But meeting with the ship on the Guinea coast more fit for their purpose, they went on board her and burnt the brigantine. It is not my business here to give an account of this French pirate, any further than Captain White's story obliges me, though I beg leave to take notice of their barbarity to the English prisoners, for they would set them up as a butt or mark to shoot at, several of whom were thus murdered in cold blood, by way of diversion. White was marked out for a sacrifice by only of these villains, who, for what reason I know not, had sworn his death, which he escaped thus. One of the crew, who had a friendship for White, knew this fellow's design to kill him in the night, and therefore advised him to lie between him and the ship's side, with intention to save him, which indeed he did, but was himself shot by the murderous villain, who mistook him for White. After some time cruising along the coast, the pirates doubled the Cape of Good Hope, and shaped their course for Madagascar, where, being drunk and mad, they knocked their ship on the head, at the south end of the island, at a place called by the natives Alexa. The country thereabouts was governed by a king, named Mafeli. When the ship struck Captain White, Captain Borman, born in the Isles of Wight, formerly a lieutenant of a man of war, but in the merchant service when he fell into the hands of the pirates, Captain Bowen and some other prisoners got into the longboat, and with broken oars and barrel staves, which they found in the bottom of the boat, paddled to Augustin Bay, which is about 14 or 15 leagues from the wreck, where they landed, and were kindly received by the King of Bavaw, the name of that part of the island, who spoke good English. They stayed here a year and a half at the king's expense, who gave them a plentiful allowance of provisions, as was his custom to all white men, who met with any misfortunes on his coast. His humanity not only provided for such, but the first European vessel that came in he always obliged to take in the unfortunate people, let the vessel be what it would, for he had no notion of any difference between pirates and merchants. At the expiration of the above term, a pirate brigantine came in, on board which the king obliged them to enter, or travel by land to some other place, which they durst not do, and of 2 evils chose the least, that of going on board the pirate vessel, which was commanded by one William Reed, who received them very civilly. This commander went along the coast, and picked up what Europeans he could meet with. His crew, however, did not exceed 40 men. He would have been glad of taking some of the wrecked Frenchmen, but for the barbarity they had used towards the English prisoners, however, it was impracticable. For the French, pretending to lord it over the natives, whom they began to treat inhumanly, were set upon by them, one half of their number cut off, and the other half made slaves. Reed, with his gang and a brigantine of 60 tons, steered his course for the Persian Gulf, where they met a grab, a one-mast vessel of about 200 tons, which was made a prize. They found nothing on board but bale goods, most of which they threw overboard in search of gold, and to make room in the vessel, but as they learned afterwards, they threw over, in their search, what they so greedily hunted for there was a considerable quantity of gold concealed in one of the bales they tossed into the sea. In this cruise Captain Reed fell ill and died, and was succeeded by one James. The brigantine being small, crazy, and worm-eating, they shaped their course for the island of Mayotta, where they took out the masts of the brigantine, fitted up the grab, and made a ship of her. Here they took in a quantity of fresh provisions, which are in this island very plentiful and very cheap, and found a 12-oared boat, which formerly belonged to the Ruby East Indiamen, which had been lost there. They stayed here all the monsoon time, which is about 6 months, after which they resolved for Madagascar. As they came in with the land, they spied a sail coming round from the east side of the island. They gave chase on both sides, so that they soon met. They hailed each other, and receiving the same answer from each vessel, viz. from the other seas, they joined company. This vessel was a small French ship, laden with liquors from Martinico, first commanded by one Forget, to trade for the pirates with slaves at Ambonavoula, on the east side of the island, in the latitude of 17 degrees 30 minutes, and was by them taken over by the following manner. The pirates, who were headed by George Booth, now commander of the ship, went on board, as they had often done, to the number of 10, and carried money with them under pretence of purchasing what they wanted. This Booth had formerly been gunner of a pirate ship, called the Dolphin. Captain Forget was pretty much upon his guard, and searched every man as he came over the side, and a pair of pocket pistols were found upon a Dutchman, who was the first that entered. The captain told him that he was a rogue, and had design upon his ship, and the pirates pretended to be so angry with this fellow's offering to come on board with arms, that they threatened to knock him on the head, and tossing him roughly into the boat, ordered him ashore, though they had before taken an oath on Bible either to carry the ship or die in the undertaking. They were all searched, but they however contrived to get on board 4 pistols, which were all the arms they had for the enterprise, though Forget had 20 hands on board, and his small arms on the awning, to be in readiness. The captain invited them into the cabin to dinner, but Booth chose to dine with the petty officer, though one Johnson, Isaac, and another, went down. Booth was to give the watchword, which was "Hurrah!" Standing near the awning, and being a nimble fellow, at one spring he threw himself upon it, drew the arms to him, fired his pistol among the men, one of whom he wounded, who jumping overboard was lost, and gave the signal. 3, I said, were in the cabin, and 7 upon deck, who with handspikes and the arms seized secured the ship's crew. The captain and his 2 mates, who were at dinner in the cabin, hearing the pistol, fell upon Johnson, and stabbed him in several places with their forks, but they being silver, did him no great damage. Forget snatched his piece, which he snapped at Isaac's breast several times, but it would not go off. At last, finding his resistance vain, he submitted, and the pirates set him, and those of his men who would not join them on shore, allowing him to take his books, papers, and whatever else he claimed as belonging to himself, and besides treating him very humanely, gave him several casks of liquor, and arms and powder, to purchase provisions in the country. I hope this discretion, as it was in a manner needful, will be excused. I shall now proceed. After they had taken in the Dolphin's company, which were on the island, and increased their crew, by that means, to the number of 80 hands, they had sailed to St. Mary's, where Captain Mawson's ship lay at anchor, between the island and the main. This gentleman and his whole ship's company had been cut off at the instigation of Ort Van Til, a Dutchman of New York. Out of her they took water cask and other necessaries, which having done, they designed for the river Methelage, on the west side of Madagascar, in the latitude of 16 degrees or thereabouts, to salt up provisions, and to proceed to the East Indies, cruise off the islands of St. John, and lie in wait for the Moor ships for Mocha. In their way to Methelage they fell in, as I have said, with the pirate, on board of which was Captain White. They joined company, came to an anchor together in the above named river, where they had cleaned, salted, and took in their provisions, and were ready to go to sea, when a large ship appeared in sight, and stood into the same river. The pirates knew not whether she was a merchantman or man of war. She had been the latter, belonging to the French king, and could mount 50 guns, but being taken by the English, she was bought by some London merchants, and fitted out from that port to slave at Madagascar, and go to Jamaica. The captain was a young, inexperienced man, who was put in with a nurse. The pirates sent their boats to speak with them, but the ship firing at them, they concluded it a man of war, and rowed ashore. The Grab standing in, and not keeping her wind so well as the French-built ship, run among a parcel of mangroves, and a stump piercing her bottom, she sunk, the other run aground, let go her anchor, and came to no damage, for the tide of flood fetched her off. The captain of the Speaker, for that was the name of the ship which frightened the pirates, was not a little vain of having forced these 2 vessels ashore, though he did not know whether they were pirates or merchantmen, and could not help expressing himself in these words: "How will my name ring on the exchange, when it is known I have run 2 pirates aground?" Which gave handle to a satirical return from one of his men after he was taken, who said, "Lord, how our captain's name will ring on the exchange, when it is heard he frightened 2 pirate ships ashore, and was taken by their boats afterwards." When the Speaker came within shot, she fired several times at the 2 vessels, and when she came to anchor, several more into the country, which alarmed the negroes, who, acquainting their king, he would allow him no trade, till the pirates living ashore, and who had a design on his ship, interceded for them, telling the king they were their countrymen, and what had happened was through a mistake, it being a custom among them to fire their guns by way of respect, and it was owing to the gunner of the ship's negligence that they fired shot. The captain of the Speaker sent his purser ashore to go up the country to the king, who lived about 24 miles from the coast, to carry a couple of small arms inlaid with gold, a couple of brass blunderbusses, and a pair of pistols as presents, and to require trade. As soon as the purser was ashore, he was taken prisoner by one Tom Collins, a Welshman, born in Pembroke, who lived on shore, and had belonged to the charming Mary